everyone, I'm back at home. I have not filmed here in so long. I think I have been home for maybe a week in the past 2 months, so it's really good to be back. And even before that, I had kind of fallen off the filming wagon, so I'm trying to get back on. I'm going to be doing my wrap up for June and July today, and then I'm going to film a couple of reviews. It kind of feels like almost everything I've filmed recently has been wrap ups, but I've kind of wanted to keep up with at least that, even though I've been really busy lately, and I am trying to get back into the channel a little bit more and to make more other kinds of content. But for those of you that are still following, I figured maybe you'd at least like to hear what I've been reading for the last few months. I'll start out with some statistics, and then I'll just talk about the books sort of in a rough order from my least favorite to favorite. Especially since I'm doing 2 months at once. The ones I read at the beginning of June, now it's mid to late August, so those books are kind of a distant memory at this point, but I'll do my best. I'm ranking them based on how I feel today about them. So between June and July, I read 17 books, so a little less than usual overall. 4 of those books were audiobooks, and actually, interestingly, out of those 4 audiobooks, 3 of them were actually rereads. In general, and you'll see this when I eventually get to my August wrap up, I've been rereading a lot more recently, and I've been finding that really enjoyable and comforting, and I feel like it just feels right to me right now, so I'll probably keep doing a lot of rereads. And then I read 6 novellas. I think most or all of those were for my Hugo Awards reading project, and I am going to be doing a video soon where I just rank those novellas, so I'm going to try not to take too much time on them today. Oh, apparently I also forgot to write down how many of different genres I read. I think I read at least 1 historical fiction. The rest were science fiction and fantasy in some order as usual, because you guys know me, that's basically all I read anyway. So pretty much my least favorite reading experience was just getting through all those Hugo Awards novellas. I was originally going to do a little bit of a synopsis about each one in this video, but I'm just going to save it for the dedicated video because I think I'm not going to do an individual review video for each novella. I'm just going to do one video where I talk about the Hugo novellas. I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences then too. But I mentioned this in my last wrap up too. I just don't really seem to care for novellas very much as a format in general. There are a few exceptions to that. I've been devouring the Penric and Desdemona series by Lois McMaster Bujold. I just read the first Murderbot recently, like in August, and that was great. So I think there are these longer running novella series that I can really get into and kind of gives me the same satisfaction as a novel or a series of novels. But most of these Hugo Awards novellas, they were too short, too underdeveloped, too much based on emotions and sort of how it made you feel rather than really delving into things, getting used to things, getting to live with characters and ideas. I really appreciate that there was a lot of diversity and representation in the authors and the novellas that were chosen for this year's Hugo finalists, but just the style of novellas just didn't really work for me. I'll talk about it more. I'll talk about it more another time. But probably my least favorite novella out of the group that I read in these past 2 months was Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. Sort of was the biggest offender in terms of what I felt like it was a purely emotional story, obviously about some very real and raw feelings and experiences of the author, but even so, I didn't find it to be terribly coherent, and it was mostly just about the emotions, and it just didn't really work for me. Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey, I liked that a little bit better. It was just a bit short, a bit more, I guess what I like to call punchliney when I talk about short stories, but it was a little bit more enjoyable to read for me. Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nhi Vo. I actually loved the author's writing. I just didn't care for the way the story was told at all. It was very, a little bit, I guess, not non-sequential, but jumping around a lot, and I'll talk more about that in the review too. But I actually would love to read more by the author because I really enjoyed the actual prose. Then in June and July, I read 2 more of the Wayward Children novellas. I've since finished all of them. I think number 5 is the one that was a Hugo Awards finalist. I read 2 and 3, which were Down Among the Sticks and Bones and Beneath the Sugar Sky. Again, if Wayward Children was the first Seanan McGuire I had ever read, I probably would never have continued reading Seanan McGuire. I think I've read all 6 that are released now. I think number 2 is actually probably still my favorite out of all of them, but I'll talk more about this. I keep promising to do reviews for things and then not getting to it, but for real, now that I've finished what is currently released in the Wayward Children series. I kind of want to do a review of the entire series, which is not going to be the most positive. It's not that I think they're bad. It just really doesn't work for me as a reader, unfortunately. I know a lot of people really relate to them or really like them. I would take an encrypted novel or even Middle Game, which wasn't my favorite either, over a Wayward Children novella pretty much any day. Finishing up the Hugo Awards novellas and related novellas, like the Seanan McGuire ones, Ring Shout by P. Djèlí Clark, that was probably my favorite of the bunch. Also deals with some very difficult topics, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in the review. But I think just in structure and in function, it felt the most like a mini novel instead of a novella, if that makes sense. Like just there was more character development, more development and fleshing out of the ideas and just the plot in general. And so I just enjoyed the reading experience a lot more. Okay, so now I'm done complaining about novellas. I think I will not do this category in the future for the Hugo Awards. I think I'll stick to some of the, novella series. Like, I have the feeling I'm really gonna like Murderbot. I'm really loving the Penric and Desdemona novellas, so it's not that I hate all novellas, but I read Son of the Storm by Suyi Davies Okungbawa. I'll put the cover here somewhere. This thing had the most gorgeous cover, and I don't usually read books because of the covers, but yeah, I kind of had to on this one. Also, I was just really interested because I've been looking for a lot more non-Western fantasy, but a lot of what I see getting written is YA, which is a genre that I don't read very much. So I was excited to see an adult African-themed epic fantasy. I didn't see great reviews of it going into it, so I was a little cautious, but I decided to give it a try anyway. And it was an okay first novel, in my opinion. There was a lot that was really good about it. Mostly, I would say the world building and the setting, just the way that was all developed. I found it to be very interesting, very fleshed out, very different than what I had read. It did feel like a fresh perspective and a fresh world still in the epic fantasy genre. But basically, the reviews that I saw going in were correct. I didn't feel like the characters and the story were all that strong. They were okay. They were kind of generically fantasy. I feel like it suffered from something I see a lot of, especially first fantasy novels doing, which is just too many viewpoint characters. Like the fastest way to tell a story, a more complicated story, is just to throw in more viewpoints so that the audience gets filled in. But a lot of those characters, we don't really need to be inside their heads. We don't really need those viewpoints. So I didn't really connect with the characters here. The story was fine. World building was phenomenal. This is the first in a series. I would consider reading the second one to see if it improves, just because world building is really a big thing for me. It's something I really enjoy, a really complex setting and all the intricacies that go into that. So I would consider reading another one for that. But other than that, it was fine. I didn't mind reading it. Like it wasn't painful, but it wasn't phenomenal to me. The one historical fiction book I read this month is called The Rose Code. It's by Kate Quinn. I've been trying to find more historical fiction recently, so let me know if you have any recommendations. A lot of historical fiction, especially about women, just falls into the exact same tropes over and over and over again, way more than fantasy and science fiction do. And I got very sick of it about 15 years ago, but I've been trying to find more because I love history, and historical fiction is my favorite way to learn about history, personally. So I actually almost put this book down after a couple of pages because one of the three central characters starts out kind of in a relationship with Prince Philip, who, had passed away, I think, around when I started reading this book. And I was thinking about it and thinking like, oh, that's kind of creepy. But then I looked into it a little bit and it turns out, I forgot to mention this is set during World War II. Anyway, this character was sort of a thinly veiled, or intended to be sort of a version of a real life girlfriend that Prince Philip did have. So it felt a little less creepy, and I decided it was okay. And it wasn't a huge part of the book anyway. It was just kind of part of the setup. So anyway, I'm glad I continued. I actually quite enjoyed this. It was about three women working at Bletchley Park, which was where the code breaking and the Enigma stuff was going on during World War II. I really like the fact that there were these three women. Actually, I think only one of them in the book was a code breaker, because that's where a lot of times if you see historical fiction set there, that's sort of where the focus is. But there was, I think one woman was a translator, and they were doing different things. What I liked about this book is that it was about three women. They all had their own ambitions, their own backstories, their own goals. None of them were just focused on romance or their romantic life. And so it just felt a lot more complex and real. It was a little bit different. It was sort of within the realm of other home front England World War II things I had read before. Not super groundbreaking in that regard, but I actually, way more than I expected, connected to these characters and what they went through, and some stuff actually hit me like kind of hard emotionally, more than I expected. So I actually, if you're looking for that kind of historical fiction, it might be worth checking this one out. I listened on audiobook to The Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. This was a reread. I had read this book. It's the first one in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, I think shortly before I started my channel, like maybe at the end of 2019 or early 2020. And I was meaning to continue the series, but I decided it had been so long, I should just do a refresher and listen to it. And to be honest, I found the book slower than I remembered. Actually, I think my husband listened to it shortly after I did, and he found it, I think, painfully slow enough that I don't think he's going to continue the series. I found, for me, while it dragged at times, I overall enjoyed it. I enjoyed Kate Redding as a narrator because I listened on audiobook. There's a lot about the book I just really like. It might just be more in the concept. The concept for the whole series is basically that Lady Trent is a renowned scientist and a pioneer of dragon science. She's looking back at her life and telling her own story from the perspective of, now she's kind of at the end of her life, but she's telling it from the point of view of her younger self. So it's a very self-aware narrative because you have an older version of the character who's telling the story about what happened when she was younger. Also, I kind of just love Isabella, who becomes Lady Trent, as a main character, because she's a complete science nerd. Basically, she's just obsessed with dragons, with science, and she has that more analytical, almost a little bit cold mindset that we might associate with somebody who just views the world in this very analytical, scientific way, not really that emotional. And also she can be kind of impulsive, but it's set in kind of an alternate world, history, Victorian England, kind of, but with a fair amount of world building to make it's not just a copy and paste. There are some things that are unique to this world, and I found a lot of it interesting. I really appreciated the character and sort of what the character was doing. So I'm definitely going to continue at least with the second book in the series and see how it goes. I finally got back to Seanan McGuire's Encrypted series last month. I read Tricks for Free, which is number 7. These books are super fun. My husband has actually gotten ahead of me in the series, so I still really need to catch up. I think there are either 9 or 10 of these books out, so I'm getting close to being caught up with the series, but they're just so much fun. They're basically just popcorn. If you haven't heard me talk about this series before, it's about a family of cryptozoologists. Basically, they're not monster hunters, but monster experts, and they are sort of aware of all the, not supernatural, but just all the non-human intelligent life that's out there, and they're sort of trying to protect it and understand it. And there's a big cast of colorful characters, crazy relatives. The books are just a lot of fun. I can't really explain what number 7 is about without giving a lot of backstory, but we are still following Annie Price, who is the youngest sibling in the family, after we already had books from the point of view of her 2 older siblings. And yeah, I'm really enjoying the character. She's a character that when you see her or hear about her from her siblings' perspective, she seems like she's just really a pain in the butt. But then when you get her perspective finally around book, I think 5 or 6, you just really start to sympathize with her and like her a lot. And of course, the side characters are great as always. There's the aunt who's a ghost, and just all the usual side characters. Then here's the one book I have to actually show you physically because I was traveling most of this time, so I read everything either as an ebook on my phone or as an audiobook. So this is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This book was originally released in 2017 and then just got re-released this past year. I was really excited to read it. Yes, partly because this cover is so gorgeous, but also because I think she had mentioned that it was a little more similar in tone to Gods of Jade and Shadow and a little less like Mexican Gothic. So I really love Silvia Moreno Garcia as a writer. I think one of the really interesting things about her is her books are just wildly different from each other in terms of genre and tone and really everything. But I think she consistently writes really strongly in whatever it is that she's going for. So this book, honestly, I didn't even think it was that much like Gods of Jade and Shadow, although it does have a little bit more of that sort of more removed historical feel to it. This is basically, there's a little bit of magic, but hardly. It's a world where some characters have a form of telekinesis, but that is part of the plot, but mostly it's just kind of a novel of manners, kind of like a Jane Austen or something like that. I did really enjoy this book. I didn't have a strong emotional reaction to it. It's quite short. I got through it pretty quickly. It's the story of this man who is kind of like a performing magician, except he actually has magic. He had a broken engagement with this socialite about a decade earlier where she broke off their engagement and married a richer man. And he sort of starts up a relationship with her husband's younger cousin. And so you get all three of their points of view, really. And it's just about the sort of tangled web of, emotions between all of these characters. And it was really well done. I enjoyed it. It's hard to know how even to categorize it, but I just have a ton of respect for an author that just goes and writes clearly whatever she wants and does well at that. I know I might not end up enjoying all of her books in the future because I think some of them will just be things that aren't for me, but I feel like I can just keep picking up her books and trying, and I will end up really loving some of them. Next, I read Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. She was nominated for the Hugo Award for Best New Author. So it's the author receiving the nomination, not the work, but I'm reading one book by each author in that category, and this is the only book she had out. So when I saw the nominations, and even when I decided to read this book, I had never heard of Lindsay Ellis. I didn't realize that she was a well-known YouTuber or internet personality, anything. I actually did end up finding and watching a bunch of her videos. So I then went into the book sort of knowing who she was. But on the other hand, I think you could read this book if, like me, you have never heard of Lindsay Ellis. The book really has very little to do with any of her other content that she makes. It's a completely different kind of thing. This is a book I was not expecting to enjoy and ended up weirdly really kind of hooked on. I'll talk about it more in the review. I actually have reread it because the first time I read it in July, it was on a plane. And I think when I read things on planes, I'm always feeling like semi-delirious. But it's basically a first contact story set in an alternate 2007 in the US. And yeah, it doesn't really fit neatly into any genre. It's kind of science fiction, thriller, but feels very sort of pop culture inspired. And honestly, it's nothing that I would have thought I liked, but I really enjoyed it. The next two books I'll talk about were both audiobook rereads. I reread Piranesi, which I said I was going to do. I heard the audiobook was really good, and it was. I really enjoyed it. I thought there was a chance that if I re-listened to it, I would end up loving it even more, and I didn't. I liked it about the same as when I read it the first time, but I did really enjoy it. It is definitely just a powerful and affecting little book that stuck with me a lot. My husband read it around the same time. We had a lot of conversations about it, so I'm really happy I re-listened to it. I actually felt like this was one where listening to the audiobook, other than that the performance was really good, I didn't get necessarily a new perspective on it or anything like that. It didn't totally change my view of the book, but I'm happy I listened to it. Then I also listened to Project Hail Mary, which I had already read. This time it was because, the audiobook was very good, but I also felt like I had just had a hard time focusing on all the science talk the first time I read the book because I was more interested in just what happened to the characters. I definitely was able to appreciate the science stuff a lot more this time. Andy Weir does explain science concepts in a way that someone like me with very little interest in science can actually understand. I can understand how it related to the plot. I understood what he was doing with it. It was really enjoyable. So I'm happy I re-listened to it. And again, I don't know if it really made me like the book even more, but I enjoyed the book the first time. I definitely enjoyed listening to it. So I'm happy I did that. Another book I listened to, this was way back, I think it was at the beginning of June, was The Pinho Egg by Diana Wynne Jones. This is middle grade. It's her last Chrestomanci book that she ever wrote. I don't think I had read this one before. I think this was my first time. So it was new to me. I think it was the only one in the series that I hadn't read. I don't know, I just find something so intensely comforting about Diana Wynne Jones. I think I really just needed something like that at the time, and so that's why I'm ranking it as my second favorite thing that I read in the last 2 months, because I just enjoyed the heck out of it. What I get from her writing is that really rare thing where I feel like I can sort of revisit my inner child as a reader, but she also writes the books in ways that both children and adults can relate to, in my opinion. So her writing never really gets old for me. I've re-listened to, I think, most of the Chrestomanci series in 2021, and I don't read much middle grade. I don't go back and read much that was written for kids, but I take so much comfort from the writing of Diana Wynne Jones, and I really needed it. Then I didn't get around to doing a review for this when it came out. It's The Witness for the Dead by Katherine Addison. This is, well, not exactly a sequel, but kind of a sequel to The Goblin Emperor, which I read last year for the first time. And The Goblin Emperor has really made for itself a place in my favorite books of all time list. So, of course, it was a little scary to have a sequel coming out. This is, as The Goblin Emperor is, The Witness for the Dead is a standalone. It's about Thara Selahar, who was an important but very side character in The Goblin Emperor. And as you can see, it's a short little book. It has a lot of the same strengths as The Goblin Emperor. I can't say that I loved it as much, but I think it does stand very well on its own. I mean, I think you would benefit from reading The Goblin Emperor. I think if you didn't like The Goblin Emperor because you found it slow and plotless, you will probably not care for this. But if you like The Goblin Emperor, I think you will probably enjoy The Witness for the Dead. It is, like The Goblin Emperor, a very slow character study about a kind of sad, but also fundamentally very good person. The main character basically has the ability, among other things, to, I think when he touches a recently deceased body, he can sort of interpret or see the memories of that person, which of course is a very mixed blessing because he finds out a lot of things that people don't want to know, but also he is very, just someone who cares a lot about doing his duty, maybe to the point where he has a bit of a tragic backstory that is brought up in The Goblin Emperor, where I think he sort of made some personal sacrifices in order to do the right thing. And yeah, he's not a very happy character, but he's also a character that cares a lot about the people around him and does have some positive relationships. And I don't know, it's hard to talk about this from the point of view of the plot. There is sort of a central murder that happens that he is trying to find the answer to, but it doesn't necessarily feel like that is the point of the book. It just is something that is a catalyst for this exploration of people. One way that this does complement The Goblin Emperor pretty well is that we do get to see a much less, I guess let's say, rarefied part of society. This is set in, it's not in the capital, it's in sort of a more provincial city. It's not among wealthy people. It's just a lot more, you get to see what life is like in this world for more common people. And it's sort of interesting to see what that's like because it's very different than the experiences that Maya, the emperor, has in the first book, because he is someone who was raised very much in isolation and then becomes emperor. So this is more just what do sort of normal middle of the road people experience. Also, a big part of the plot here has to do with an opera singer and an opera company, and I'm a musician, so I really enjoyed that. This is set obviously in a fantasy world, so who knows exactly what opera is like in this world. I mean, it's described, but probably not exactly like our opera, but I'm assuming, in my mind, I kind of imagine it like a combination of like or, standard opera, Baroque opera, Chinese opera, something kind of in between. Maybe I should do a review of this book. I've been talking about it for a while. It seems like I have stuff to say. Maybe I should reread this and do a review because I've been rereading so much recently. Let me know if you want to hear me talk even more about The Witness for the Dead, or if you feel like I kind of covered it. All right, thanks so much for watching. I feel like my throat is starting to hurt because I'm not used to making long videos like this anymore, but I'm excited to be home and filming again. I'm looking forward to making some more videos. I'm not going to promise any particular schedule or anything because I need to get life sorted out, but it's been fun getting to talk about what I read in the last few months. Let me know if there's anything here you've read or you're interested in, or you now definitely don't want to read, or anything you think I am just terribly wrong about. I always enjoy hearing those. So until next time.